Trump's words sparked outrage, but Obama's response turned the moment into a nationwide lesson on true leadership. It was a moment that millions witnessed live. A moment that didn't just ripple across a crowded hall, but sent waves across the nation. In the midst of an event that was supposed to promote understanding and constructive dialogue, the atmosphere transformed into something electric, tense, and unforgettable. Inside the expansive Phoenix Convention Center, where leaders, students, journalists, and everyday citizens had gathered for a much-anticipated bipartisan discussion on race and leadership, the air felt charged even before the pivotal instant arrived. Two presidents, one carrying the responsibilities of the current office, the other bearing the legacy of his past service, sat across from one another at the front of the room. The purpose had been clear: discuss the future of a divided country, explore ways to bridge the gap, show that dialogue between leaders with vastly different visions was still possible. But all it took was one sentence, sharp and casually delivered, to set history on a different course. When Donald Trump leaned into his microphone, his eyes fixed on Barack Obama with a narrowed, almost dismissive gaze, he uttered a phrase that would be replayed and dissected endlessly in the hours to follow. "Sit down, boy." The words were not just heard, they were felt. A gasp tore through the hall like a sudden gust of cold air. Conversations that had been humming moments before fell away in an instant, replaced by a suffocating stillness. It wasn't just the remark itself. It was the weight it carried, the insinuation behind it, the history those words evoked. Some attendees physically recoiled. Others froze mid-motion. The sound of someone dropping a pen echoed louder than it should have. The hall, filled with thousands, became a suspended moment in time. Up in the front row, a pastor from Detroit bowed his head, pressing his lips together as though holding back both anger and prayer. 2 rows behind, a young man in a navy sweatshirt muttered under his breath, his phone already raised, recording what he sensed would become more than just another political exchange. Every major news outlet's camera stayed trained on the stage: CNN, Fox News, local Arizona affiliates, streaming services, all poised to catch what had, just seconds ago, been an ordinary panel. Trump leaned back in his chair, the corners of his mouth twitching in something between satisfaction and provocation. Some of his supporters in the room chuckled hesitantly, unsure if this was the moment to cheer or to brace themselves. Across the aisle, faces stiffened, jaws set tight, eyes wide with disbelief and anger. A woman with silver hair clutched her necklace as though grounding herself, her expression a blend of outrage and disbelief. And then, Obama. He didn't jump to his feet. He didn't slam a fist against the table or cut the air with a retort. He simply adjusted his posture, one hand resting gently on his lap, the other brushing against his jacket to smooth a crease that didn't need smoothing. That single, deliberate act spoke louder than any immediate retort could have, composure as a statement. The former president's face remained unreadable. No flash of anger, no visible flinch, just a stillness that seemed to stretch across the room. Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was dense, pressing against every wall, crawling under every seat. A whisper traveled across a section of the balcony. Is he going to respond? In the press area, journalists hovered with fingers frozen above keyboards, knowing a narrative was being born before their eyes. Trump broke the quiet first. Leaning once again toward the microphone, he offered a smirk lined with impatience. "What? Did I say something wrong?" His tone, feigned innocence laced with provocation, attempted to recapture the moment. But Obama did not move. He merely tilted his head, the faintest suggestion of a half-smile ghosting across his lips. The room murmured, restless. Everyone, from seasoned correspondents to a 12-year-old boy seated with his father in the midsection, felt the tension thickening. The boy tugged his father's sleeve. Why'd he call him boy? His father, eyes locked forward, muttered only, "You'll understand someday." Seconds stretched. Trump drummed his fingers against the desk, louder now, his authority beginning to sound like it needed convincing. Someone in the crowd whispered, almost in awe, "He's saying more by saying nothing." And it was true. Each heartbeat of silence shifted the power away from the insult and toward the man who refused to rise to it. The cameras zoomed in. Reporters stopped typing. The very anticipation became the event. When Obama finally reached for the glass of water at his side, lifting it slowly, deliberately, the clinking of ice against glass echoed unnaturally loud in the hush. He took a measured sip, set it back down with care, and let his gaze sweep briefly across the crowd before settling again on Trump. Trump, now visibly irritated, let out a short laugh, more bark than humor. What, nothing to say? Thought you had a lot of words for me. The laugh ricocheted awkwardly around the hall and fell flat. And then, finally, Obama leaned forward, placed both hands calmly on the table, and spoke. Not loudly, not forcefully, but with a softness that carried more weight than any shout. I'll answer that. The room exhaled collectively. Cameras clicked. Fingers resumed typing furiously. People leaned forward in their seats, as though those 4 words had just cracked open a vault. The restraint, the patience, had been the prelude. Now the symphony was about to begin. He didn't address Trump immediately. Instead, he glanced briefly toward the moderator, then at the crowd, as if to remind them who the real audience was. Not the man across from him, but the nation watching. You know, Obama began, his voice steady. I've been given plenty of labels over the years. He paused, allowing the tension to breathe. But one thing I've never had to request, never had to plead for, is respect. The hall erupted. Applause burst like a dam breaking. Shouts of amen. And that's right, mingling with the thunder of clapping hands. A pastor raised his arm high. Students in the third row whispered excitedly to each other, one muttering, "He's about to tear him apart," without even raising his voice. Trump tried to wave off the reaction, rolling his eyes, mouthing something that cameras eagerly caught, but the crowd ignored. Obama raised his hand slightly, not in anger, but to let the moment settle again. His timing was meticulous. He wasn't just responding. He was commanding the rhythm of the entire event. When he spoke again, his words cut not because they were sharp, but because they were steady. Respect, he said, isn't granted because of your title. It's not measured by how loud you talk or how many people clap for you. It's something you earn by how you carry yourself when no one's watching, by how you speak to those you disagree with, and by the example you leave behind. The crowd clapped hard, this time not just out of agreement, but out of something deeper, recognition. Trump shifted in his chair, crossing his arms, his jaw working. Don't preach to me about respect, he snapped suddenly, his voice rising. I'm the President of the United States. The declaration echoed, forceful but trembling at the edges. Obama did not meet force with force. He let the words hang, let them expose their own insecurity, then answered calmly, "Yes, you are. And that's exactly why your words matter more than most. That title, it's not a weapon. It's a responsibility." Cheers rippled through the hall, feet stomping now, not just hands clapping. Even some who had come expecting to support Trump looked uneasy, their expressions shifting as they absorbed the gravity of what they were witnessing. Obama leaned slightly forward again. You can order someone to sit. You can demand they shrink. But respect, real respect, doesn't answer to commands. It rises where there's principle. It grows where there's dignity. At that, a woman in a bright red blazer stood, her voice cutting above the noise. Say that again. The hall roared in agreement. The moderator raised his hands in a half-hearted attempt to restore order, but even he couldn't suppress the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. The power in the room had shifted completely, not through volume, not through aggression, but through the art of waiting, the art of responding with intention rather than impulse. By the time Obama leaned back in his seat, the debate had already moved beyond a clash of personalities. It had become a live demonstration of something the country often claimed to have forgotten, that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it listens. And when it finally speaks, it doesn't need to shout to be heard. A faint, almost knowing smile tugged at the corner of Obama's mouth as he leaned back slightly before speaking again. His voice, calm yet steady, carried across the charged room. He reminded the audience that the true measure of a person, man or woman, was never in how much power they could seize, but in how they chose to wield whatever influence had been entrusted to them. He spoke of the lessons passed on to children, that real strength lies in fairness, that integrity matters more than bravado, that lifting people higher is always more honorable than tearing them apart. These aren't complex ideas, he said, letting his words breathe, but they mean everything when your decisions affect millions. The weight of that message hung heavy, but before its echo could settle, Donald Trump leaned forward sharply, cutting through the moment with impatience. Oh, please, he scoffed, his voice dripping with derision. You think giving speeches makes you noble? People didn't vote me in to preach. They put me here to fight. This time, Obama didn't just glance at him. He turned his entire frame toward Trump, his gaze steady, piercing yet free of anger. You're correct about one thing, Obama replied evenly. The people didn't hire you to preach sermons, but they did expect you to lead. And there is a profound difference between fighting for yourself and standing up for those who don't share your faith, or your view of the world. Leadership isn't about domination. It's about representation. The words rolled out with quiet force, and the hall erupted once more, this time even louder than before. The applause rippled through the rows, not just from the usual supporters, but also from unexpected corners. A few Republican attendees, initially there to cheer Trump, found their hands coming together despite themselves. Camera lens sought out the most telling faces. A Latina student from Tucson brushing a tear from her cheek. An aging veteran with weathered hands clapping slowly, never taking his eyes off the stage. But Obama wasn't finished. He leaned slightly toward the microphone, his voice dropping just enough to make the crowd lean in. You know, Mr. President, he continued, almost in a whisper, the greatest phrase a leader can ever speak is not sit down. It is, stand up with me. That is the difference. The reaction was immediate, seismic. The convention hall seemed to shake as people leapt to their feet. Cheers, clapping, whistles, all cascading in waves, bouncing off the steel beams and concrete walls, refusing to fade. Some chanted it outright. Stand up with me. The words, so simple yet so resonant, were already morphing into a rallying cry. Trump threw up his hands, his lips curling with visible irritation. Oh, give me a break, he muttered, but his protest was drowned out by the roar of the crowd. The former president folded his hands once more, a picture of composure, and let the moment breathe. Yet, the true story of that night wasn't only in those words. It was what followed, the aftershocks that would ripple far beyond those walls. Inside the Phoenix Convention Center, the noise refused to settle. Applause would die down in one section only to ignite in another, echoing back like a defiant chorus. What was meant to be a forum on policy and leadership had shifted into something else entirely. A battleground of ideals, where words became weapons and the spectators themselves became part of the clash. On the left flank of the stage, a group of young activists from Los Angeles jumped up, fists raised, shouting Obama's closing line again and again. Stand up with me. Their chant caught on, swelling as more voices joined, building into a rhythm that shook the rafters. But not all hands were clapping. In the rear, a cluster of Trump loyalists waved their red caps in defiance. One man, salt and pepper beard bristling, his t-shirt emblazoned with "Build the Wall," yelled over the noise. Sit down, Obama. Your time's over. His protest was quickly swallowed by the cheers, but it revealed the sharp fault lines splitting the room. Journalists scrambled to capture the chaos. Notebooks scribbled. Cameras swung wildly, knowing that every angle told a different version of the same story. An Arizona Republic reporter leaned toward her colleague and muttered, "This isn't a dialogue anymore. This is going to shape headlines for weeks." Down front, Reverend Harold Gaines, who had traveled with his congregation from Detroit, pressed a hand to his chest, his voice thick with emotion as he whispered to the woman beside him, "That's dignity. That's what they can't erase." Just a few rows behind, a Republican governor from Nebraska leaned toward his aide, face taut but contemplative. "He's making sense," the governor murmured reluctantly, "and that worries me." The aide was already jotting notes furiously, calculating how the governor's reaction might play in the coming press cycles. Even on the stage, the divide was visible in posture alone. Trump leaned back, arms crossed, fingers drumming the desk with irritation that the microphones picked up, a faint rhythm of frustration. Beside him, Obama sat motionless, hands calmly folded, his eyes sweeping the crowd like a teacher waiting for a lesson to take root. The moderator, growing desperate, cleared his throat and tried once again to assert control. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's keep this constructive." His plea cracked in the air, feeble against the competing waves of cheering and shouting. The energy in the room was no longer something to be moderated. It had become a living force. A college student from Arizona State called out toward the stage, his voice breaking through the din. Respect isn't power, it's character. That declaration sparked another burst of applause. While from the opposite side, a Trump supporter barked back, "We don't need lectures. We need fighters." The clashing voices hung in the air like colliding thunderclouds, raw, unfiltered, emblematic of a country divided. Fox News cameras zoomed in on a young black girl clutching her mother's hand, her wide eyes a portrait of confusion and awe. CNN's broadcast stayed fixed on Obama's serene expression, the counterweight to Trump's growing agitation. Each network, in real time, was building its own America. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," the moderator tried again, but his words dissolved under the noise. This was no longer about questions. It had become a torrent of raw, unrestrained emotion, spilling from the balconies to the front row. Trump's voice finally cut through like a crack of thunder. This isn't a pep rally for him. "I'm the president here, not him." His words rang out, but instead of applause, a chorus of boos rose to meet them. Obama didn't answer immediately. He simply turned his head, slowly, delivering the same patient look he had worn all evening. That silence, interpreted by the crowd as strength, drew another round of applause without a word spoken. Security at the exit stiffened, scanning the room as if bracing for an escalation that never quite came. It wasn't violent, yet, but it was tense, like a stadium torn between rival teams with everything on the line. And as the noise swelled once more, one thing became undeniable. The room wasn't rallying behind a single man. It was splitting along a philosophical fault line. To some, leadership meant strength through command, the ability to dominate the space with will alone. To others, it was something quieter, deeper, patience, restraint, dignity under fire. Cameras caught all of it. The jeers, the cheers, the tears streaking down a young woman's face, the stubborn frown etched into Trump's profile, the calm, unshakable poise of Obama beside him. Americans at home weren't just watching a political event. They were watching a reflection of themselves, fractured, passionate, unwilling to look away. And yet, as powerful as the confrontation had been, the most significant storm was brewing not within those walls, but outside. By the time the forum adjourned, the desert night was ablaze with the glow of television lights and satellite trucks. Reporters swarmed the sidewalks, microphones thrust forward, cameras balanced on shoulders, each one angling to capture the first reactions of attendees spilling into the warm Arizona air. CNN's Jake Tapper was already lived just steps from the entrance. "What we witnessed tonight," he said, "was not merely a policy exchange. It was a cultural tremor." Across the street, Fox News host Laura Ingraham framed the moment differently beneath her studio lights. "This is being blown out of proportion. The president was being his usual candid self, and the left wants to turn it into something it's not." Meanwhile, MSNBC's Rachel Maddow played the clip on loop, shaking her head. "You cannot overlook the gravity of those words. Sit down, boy. That wasn't a stumble. That was a choice." And Obama's response, measured, calm, and cutting, made that contrast impossible to ignore. On social media, the wildfire had already ignited. Twitter's trending bar swelled with hashtags. #SitDownBoy, climbing rapidly toward the global top spot, and #StandUpWithHim, echoing Obama's own phrase. Surging just beneath it, a balcony video captured the crowd's audible gasp with pristine clarity and racked up 3 million views on TikTok in less than an hour. CNN's clip of Obama's line about respect was retweeted over 200,000 times in the first half hour. Memes began to flood Instagram and Reddit. Trump with arms crossed and a scowl captioned, "When the teacher calls you out in front of the class." And Obama's steady gaze paired with lines like, "Real leaders don't yell, they teach." By the next morning, the fallout was everywhere. Evening newscasts reshuffled their openings. Local stations cut weather reports to replay the exchange. Boston's WBZ led its 11 p.m. broadcast with a clip, the anchor's voice betraying a mix of surprise and gravity. Tonight, a moment in Arizona that has the nation buzzing. Late-night comedians pounced. Jimmy Kimmel aired the clip to a chorus of gasps and applause. "I haven't seen someone get roasted that politely since my mom told me she never wanted kids." Stephen Colbert leaned into his camera. "That wasn't a comeback, that was a seminar." But beyond the jokes, something deeper was moving. Pastors and teachers posted long reflections. "Our children saw tonight that leadership is not noise," wrote Reverend Lisa Harmon of Indianapolis. "It is composure." It is restraint. It is choosing to stand for something rather than against someone. Her post was shared tens of thousands of times. Conservative outlets fought back. Breitbart's headline blared, "Obama plays victim again." Media cheers. Sean Hannity told his viewers, "The left is trying to crown Obama as a saint, while the real fighter is being demonized for speaking plain truth." Still, the clip was inescapable. Whether you tuned into CNN, scrolled Instagram, or checked your local ABC affiliate, you saw it. Trump snapping, "Sit down, boy." Obama pausing, adjusting his jacket, and delivering a line that cut sharper than any insult. By 1 a.m. Eastern, analysts estimated over 50 million Americans had already seen some version of the confrontation. By dawn, the headlines were uniform in their diversity. The Washington Post ran, "Respect versus Power. Obama's calm rebuke freezes Trump." The Wall Street Journal wrote, "Forum sparks firestorm as presidents clash." The Los Angeles Times needed no interpretation. Its headline was simply, "Sit down, boy." The forum in Phoenix was over, but its echo had escaped the walls, traveling across screens and breakfast tables, into classrooms and boardrooms. It was no longer about two men trading lines on a stage. It was about a country being forced to ask, in real time, what kind of strength it truly respected. That evening, within the private quarters of the White House, the atmosphere was tense and electric, like a storm trapped inside ornate walls. Donald Trump paced restlessly across the length of the polished floor in the Lincoln sitting room, his tie dangling loose around his neck, his complexion flushed with frustration. The television flickered in the background, tuned to Fox News, where Laura Ingraham was attempting to mount a defense of his recent remarks. Yet even in her voice, there was an audible strain, an effort to steady a narrative that was already slipping away. "They're twisting it. Twisting everything." Trump snapped, thrusting his finger toward the screen as if to stab through it. His advisors stood scattered across the room, some perched nervously on the edge of armchairs, others shifting their weight in discomfort. "That's not what I meant. Fake news. Always blowing this up." His voice cracked slightly, not in weakness, but in agitation, in disbelief that his words had taken on a life of their own. Jason Wilkes, a senior aide who had been with him through other storms, cleared his throat carefully. "Mr. President, with all due respect, that clip is everywhere. Social media isn't letting this go. Even some of our allies are struggling to reframe it." His words were cautious, yet they landed heavily. Trump spun on his heel, his glare sharp as a whip. "That's your job. Fix it. Call Hannity. Call Tucker. I want every outlet hammering this point. Obama was the worst president we've ever had. The economy, the jobs, the disasters. Remind them." His palm came down hard against the arm of a chair with a sharp smack. "We cannot give him the win on this." Hundreds of miles away, in a calm, softly lit suite in downtown Chicago, a very different scene was unfolding. Barack Obama sat with a few of his closest confidants and former staffers. The television muted as the news replayed his own response to Trump's remark. The caption scrolled silently across the screen. Valerie Jarrett, seated forward on the sofa, spoke in a low, deliberate tone. "Barack, that wasn't just a response. That was something else. You didn't shout. You didn't match his energy. You showed a contrast." Obama pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose, exhaling slowly. "I didn't come here to spar with him tonight. I came to talk about leadership, about where we're headed as a nation." But he made it about respect. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what people needed to see. David Plouffe, hunched near the window, glanced up from his phone. The reaction is enormous. It's everywhere. Trending globally. Hashtags, videos, commentary. Young people are quoting your line like it's a mantra. "Stand up with me." I haven't seen this kind of raw energy since Yes, We Can. Obama gave a soft, almost weary chuckle but shook his head. "Let's not get carried away. I'm not running for anything. But if the message sticks, if people start talking about dignity and respect again, maybe that's worth the firestorm." Michelle Obama, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally broke her silence. "Barack, it wasn't just what you said. It was how you carried yourself. You didn't let him pull you into the mud. Kids were watching this. Families were watching this. They need to see that composure still matters." Meanwhile, in Washington, the phones never stopped buzzing. Calls from Republican senators flooded the White House switchboard, some publicly pledging support, while privately urging Trump to temper his tone. Senator Alan Briggs from Ohio was blunt. "Mr. President, that phrase will not play well in the suburbs. You've got to walk it back, or this will haunt you." Trump scoffed audibly. "Walk it back? Never. That's weakness. People didn't elect me to apologize. They elected me to fight." He grabbed a pen, scrawled notes on a pad, and barked at an aide. "Draft me a tweet. We're not on defense. We hit back harder." Back in Chicago, Obama's group shifted their discussion toward the broader implications. Jared read aloud reactions from community leaders. "Pastor Williams in Baltimore says he's using your words in Sunday's sermon." A teacher in Dallas played the clip for her students. "Even a few conservative voices are saying you handled it with class." Obama leaned back, thoughtful. "This isn't about me. It's about what kind of behavior we accept as normal. If a president can speak like that without consequence, what does it teach? Not just adults, but the kids who are watching." Michelle nodded firmly. "That's why tonight mattered. Not because of politics, but because it drew a line in the sand. Respect isn't optional. It's foundational." But even as Obama reflected, Trump's machinery was already grinding into action. By 2 a.m., tweets from his official account began firing. "Fake news twisting my words." Obama's weak reply won't fix the disaster he left behind. His loyalists retweeted in droves. But for every echo of support, there were 10 voices replaying Obama's calm tone, sharing the clip with captions like, "This is what leadership looks like." By dawn, the conversation had spilled far beyond political circles. It was no longer a matter for pundits or campaign strategists. It was a kitchen table topic, a workplace debate, a classroom lesson. In a small diner along Interstate 71 in Columbus, Ohio, the clip replayed endlessly on a television mounted above the counter. Truck drivers and factory workers hunched over steaming mugs of coffee, eyes fixed on the screen. "That was cold," muttered a man in a faded camouflage jacket. He didn't even have to raise his voice. A waitress, wiping down the counter, added, "My kids saw it this morning before school. They said Obama looked like a teacher scolding the class. And they're right." And he didn't even yell. In Dallas, a high school teacher wheeled a TV into her classroom and pressed play. The room was silent as Obama's response filled the screen. When it ended, a quiet boy at the back raised his hand. Why did he call him boy? "My grandpa said that word was never just about being young." The teacher paused, then said softly, "That's exactly the conversation we need to have. Words matter, and a leader's words matter most of all." Across the country, the ripple effect continued. In Detroit, Reverend Harold Gaines, who had attended the forum himself, thundered from his pulpit, "Respect does not bow to commands." The congregation erupted, some rising to their feet as he declared, "Dignity is not granted by office. It is proven by character." His sermon went viral overnight, reaching millions. Even in rural Montana, a retired farmer named Clyde, never an Obama voter, told a local reporter outside a hardware store, "I didn't vote for the man. Never did. But I'll say this. He carried himself better than I've seen in a long time." The other guy looked rattled. His candid honesty struck a chord, especially with independents weary of partisan brawls. College campuses came alive. At the University of Michigan, students organized an impromptu rally on the quad, holding signs reading "Stand Up With Me." Videos of them chanting spread across TikTok, many of the participants too young to have voted during Obama's presidency. "This isn't about left or right," one student shouted into a bullhorn. "It's about how leaders treat people. That's the standard." Not everyone agreed. In Alabama, a local radio host railed, "The media is trying to make Obama a saint, but Trump's the president, and Trump doesn't back down." Calls flooded his station, some supportive, others furious, but all engaged. Even workplaces far from politics buzzed with debate. In a steel plant in Gary, Indiana, workers argued over lunch. One man, his hand still streaked with soot, said, "I don't care who you vote for. If my boss talked to me the way Trump talked to him, I'd walk out." Another fired back, "But that's Trump. He's a fighter." People like that. Their break room echoed with laughter, frustration, and animated arguments. On social media, deeply personal stories surfaced. A single mother in Albuquerque tweeted, "My 12-year-old daughter asked me why the president called Obama boy. I had to explain a history she shouldn't have to carry. Thank you, Obama, for showing her that strength can look like calm. Her post was shared tens of thousands of times. In Miami, an elderly Cuban American told Univision, Obama showed real leadership, calm, dignity. That's what I want for my grandchildren. His words resonated with viewers tired of chaos. By Monday, polls showed a remarkable trend. A Reuters Snap survey revealed that 62% of Americans, including more than a third of Republicans, believed Obama had handled himself with greater dignity than Trump during the forum. The data shook Washington. Lawmakers scrambled. Strategists on both sides drafted talking points overnight. Capitol Hill erupted with questions as reporters cornered senators arriving for the week. Senator Caroline Haskins of Vermont was blunt. That comment was unacceptable. Full stop. It demeaned not only President Obama, but millions of Americans who saw themselves in that moment. Leadership is about lifting people up, not tearing them down. Her clip went viral, her tone measured but cutting. Others hedged. Senator Rick Dalworth of Florida told reporters, the president speaks directly, and sometimes that ruffles feathers. Let's focus on policy, not personalities. Yet his eyes flickered nervously toward the cameras. He knew the moment was sticking. Younger lawmakers, particularly in the House, were more forceful. Representative Alia Brooks of Minnesota tweeted, respect is not optional. Every child watching learned more from Obama's restraint than from Trump's outburst. Her post reached 1 million likes in a day. Republicans in vulnerable districts walked a tightrope. Congressman Paul McKenna of Pennsylvania issued a statement. I don't agree with the phrasing used, but I support the president's broader agenda. Local newspapers mocked it as spineless. A leaked memo from the Republican National Committee warned candidates. Avoid repeating or defending the phrasing. Pivot to the economy, security, or Biden criticism. Democrats smelled an opening. House Speaker Linda Navarro held a press conference flanked by civil rights leaders, declaring, this is bigger than politics. It's about the example we set for our children. President Obama showed grace. President Trump showed disdain. And with that, the clash between two visions of leadership was no longer confined to a single night's exchange. It had become a national reckoning over dignity, language, and the moral weight of a president's words. Across the country, advocacy groups seized the moment. Civil rights organizations praised Obama's measured, composed response while urging an apology from the president. Legal experts took to morning broadcasts to unpack why the language used carried such a painful historical shadow, particularly for African Americans. Faith leaders found themselves divided. Some defended the president's bluntness as a form of honesty, while others, like Reverend Thomas Ellery in Tennessee, reminded their congregations that authority devoid of respect is no authority at all. Within the White House, the communications team scrambled to redirect the narrative. Press Secretary Dana Hollis faced a press corps hungry for accountability. She insisted the president spoke plainly, that his words were being twisted beyond intent, urging reporters to focus on policy rather than a single soundbite. Yet the briefing devolved into chaos as questions piled on, and the very effort to contain the story seemed only to stoke it further. Through it all, Obama chose silence. No official statement, no television interviews, no pointed tweets. His restraint became its own form of commentary. As one political analyst observed on NBC, sometimes saying nothing amplifies your point louder than 1,000 press releases. By the following Tuesday, late-night comedians were still riffing on the clash, but lawmakers were no longer laughing. Committees referenced the moment during hearings. Speeches on the House floor quoted his line verbatim. What had begun as a heated exchange between two political giants had leaked into the very bloodstream of governance, influencing debates and shaping talking points across the aisle. Beyond Washington, the ripple effect deepened. In schools, churches, workplaces, and homes, the words had taken on a meaning far beyond partisanship. At a high school in Phoenix, not far from where the original exchange occurred, a social studies teacher played the clip for her class. Students, some of whose relatives had been in the crowd that night, watched quietly as Obama spoke about respect being earned, not demanded. One student underlined the phrase in his notebook, while the teacher paused to explain. That is leadership, not through shouting or insults, but through honesty. In a small Birmingham church, Reverend Miriam Tate held her Bible in one hand and her phone in the other, the screen frozen on Obama's face. When a man refuses to be dragged down by anger and instead calls us higher, she told her congregation, That is worth remembering. Applause broke out where silence had once reigned. On the other side of the country, in Sacramento, a group of middle schoolers took the phrase, "Stand up with me," and turned it into a banner across their cafeteria. Their principal admitted to being caught off guard, remarking that the students, many too young to recall Obama's early presidency, had claimed the message as their own. Images of the banner flooded social media, a reminder that even the youngest were listening. Hospitals paused their morning briefings to reflect on the idea of leadership as service. Farmers in Kansas nodded at their radios, saying, "Out here, respect is simple. Treat people right or you lose them." The words transcended politics. They became lessons in character. For the younger generation, the moment became content to remix, reinterpret, and reframe. TikTok users layered the speech over sports highlights, study montages, and even rap beats, sending one clip of student athletes training to over 10 million views in 2 days. Parents found themselves navigating unexpected dinner table conversations. A mother in Milwaukee recounted how her 9-year-old son asked, "Why was the president mean to Mr. Obama?" She struggled to explain the historical sting of the word used, but showed him the clip and said, "This is what strength looks like. Calm, steady, unshaken." In Springfield, a teenage girl asked her father why Obama hadn't shouted back. He replied, "Because strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, quiet carries the sharpest edge." Not everyone agreed with the narrative that formed. Conservative radio hosts accused the media of idolizing Obama, mocking the praise as overblown. One host quipped that if eye rolling and lecturing counted as leadership, half the country's teachers would qualify as presidents. But even their mockery betrayed how deeply the moment had permeated public discourse, because they too couldn't stop talking about it. Across dinner tables, in libraries, in town halls, debates emerged not just about what was said, but what it meant. A book club in Wisconsin found itself in a spontaneous argument. One retiree praised Obama's restraint. Another insisted Trump was elected to fight. A third counted softly, "Fighting isn't the same as leading." There was no resolution, but there was reflection. And in an age of noise, that was something. By the week's end, schools in states far removed from the original forum were assigning essays on what leadership truly is. One fifth grader in Phoenix wrote, "Leaders don't make people feel small. They help them stand tall." The line went viral, proof that children understood what many adults struggled to articulate. Obama, meanwhile, remained absent from the media circuit. His choice to let the moment breathe, to let his words do the work, became as much a part of the legacy as the words themselves. Trump, in contrast, flooded the airwaves with rebuttals, doubling down with interviews and statements, energizing his base but also fueling the very fire he sought to extinguish. Historians began to weigh in, noting that such moments rarely matter for their immediate political outcomes. They matter because they leave an imprint, a cultural memory that shapes how a generation defines leadership and dignity. A decade from now, students may read about this not for its policy impact, but because it captured a nation's struggle with what respect looks like in power. It wasn't just about Obama or Trump. It was about anyone who had ever been told to sit down, to stay quiet, to accept indignity. It was about the choice to meet provocation not with fury, but with poise. Ultimately, this moment underlined an enduring truth. Leadership is not measured in decibels or dominance. It is measured in how one carries themselves when provoked, in whether one can remind others of their worth without diminishing anyone else's. In that Phoenix hall, before cameras and millions of unseen viewers, a line was drawn, not between left and right, but between two models of influence. One that demands submission, and one that invites participation. Respect, as the former president said, cannot be demanded. It is earned, over and over again, by how we act. And so, the conversation turned from politics to principle. What kind of example do we want our children to see? What kind of leaders do we reward as hashtags continue to trend and pundits continue to spar? Something quieter but more lasting settled in homes, classrooms, and workplaces. The sense that words matter, and that the way we respond to disrespect matters even more. For every heated exchange in the media, there were a dozen quiet lessons being taught in real life. Lessons about patience, about strength and restraint, and about the power of saying, not "sit down," but "stand with me." That is how cultures shift, not always through policy, but through stories that live on in the minds of those who hear them.